Have you ever wondered what happens when the family ATM finally shuts down? They always claim blood is thicker than water. To my brother, that just meant I had to clean up his messes. He thought he could use two innocent 10-year-old kids as emotional hostages to force my hand one last time. He had no idea my refusal was not just a boundary. It was an absolute death sentence for their entire parasitic charade. Hello, dear listeners, and welcome back to Maya Revenge Stories. Before we begin, I want to share that YouTube has unfortunately disabled monetization on our channel, leaving us without the budget to keep producing the content you love. If you find today's story captivating, please consider supporting us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon, where you can listen to exclusive, incredibly detailed true stories with multiple emotional voice actors that we simply cannot publish on YouTube. You can easily join by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the video description or the pinned comment of this video. Now, let us dive right into today's story, told from the perspective of our protagonist, Quinn Tucker. My name is Quinn Tucker. I am 35 years old and work as an operations system design expert at Vanguard Nexus Logistics. In the high-stakes corporate world, my primary job is to find inefficiencies, locate the broken links in a complex chain of supply, and ruthlessly eliminate them to ensure that a massive system runs flawlessly. I am highly respected in my field, known for my cold logic and unwavering boundaries, but within the confines of my own family, I was never seen as an expert, a professional, or even a person with my own life. To them, I was simply the emergency fund. I was the backup credit card that never declined. I was the permanent, unpaid nanny expected to drop everything at a moment's notice. For years, the unspoken rule in our household was that my success was their personal safety net, a resource to be mined whenever they felt lazy or entitled. The ultimate breaking point arrived on a crisp Friday morning. I was in my home office, reviewing the final schematics for a massive corporate logistics overhaul, when my phone buzzed on the desk. The caller ID flashed my brother's name, Mason. He is 38 years old, a man whose entire existence is a monument to unearned entitlement and chronic irresponsibility. I answered the call, keeping my voice perfectly neutral, expecting another request for a loan or a favor. Without a single word of greeting, Mason aggressively launched into his demands. "I just ordered a premium rideshare," he announced, his voice muffled by the sounds of an airport terminal. "Leo and Mia are in the car with their suitcases. They will be at your place in about 45 minutes. Chloe and I have a VIP resort booking in Miami, and we are already running late for our first-class flight." There was a time when my heart would have hammered in my chest, a time when I would have scrambled, canceled my weekend plans, and rushed to open my door because they were my niece and nephew, two 10-year-old twins whom I genuinely adored. I used to be terrified of the guilt trips and the family drama, but that weak, accommodating version of me was completely dead and gone. I took a slow, measured breath, letting the silence on the line stretch just long enough to make him deeply uncomfortable. "No," I said. My voice was completely flat, devoid of any anger or apology. "I am not taking the kids. Cancel the car. Mason, do not send them to my address." Mason let out a sharp, condescending scoff. He sounded exactly like a man who believed the universe existed solely to serve his whims. He truly thought he held all the power. "Oh, come on, Quinn," he mocked. "Stop throwing a tantrum. You always do this dramatic routine before you finally cave. We are literally at the airport. The car is already on the highway. If you want to play hardball, fine. The kids will just have to wait on the porch until you stop being selfish and let them in." He hung up the phone before I could even reply. As the call disconnected, a cold, unyielding calm washed over my entire body. Mason thought he was playing the ultimate trump card. He visualized his innocent children standing on the familiar wooden porch of my old suburban house, knowing my conscience would never let them stay out in the freezing morning air. He thought he could use his own flesh and blood as emotional hostages to force my hand one last time. But Mason was operating on severely outdated data. He had no idea that 4 months ago, I had quietly sold that drafty suburban house. I had packed up my life, severed the invisible strings they had tied around my limbs, and moved into a high-security, ultra-exclusive luxury apartment building right in the heart of downtown Chicago. The address he had just given the driver was no longer mine. The house now belonged to someone else entirely. In the past, I might have panicked. I might have called the driver, or rushed back to my old neighborhood to intercept the kids before things got wildly out of hand. Not today. My corporate instincts instantly took over. Every system needs a failsafe, and I was about to trigger mine. I took immediate screenshots of the brief text message he had sent earlier confirming the drop-off. I exported the exact timestamp and duration of our phone call. I compiled everything into a neat, encrypted folder and emailed it directly to my personal attorney with the subject line marking it as highly urgent. I did not shed a single tear. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I checked my reflection in the hallway mirror, smoothed the lapels of my tailored blazer, and gathered my presentation materials. I had a board of directors meeting in 20 minutes, and I was not going to let the pathetic dying breath of a parasitic family dynamic ruin my focus. While I was sitting in my glass-walled boardroom 20 miles away, a sleek, black luxury sports utility vehicle was pulling up to the curb of my former residence. Inside the cavernous back seat sat Leo and Mia. They were only 10 years old, small for their age, their feet barely touching the floor mats. Between them sat 2 oversized, heavy suitcases packed with enough clothes for 14 days. They had not been hit or bruised, but the psychological whiplash was evident in their wide, anxious eyes. Just 45 minutes earlier, their father had hastily shoved them into the back of this stranger's car. He had flashed a fake, overly enthusiastic smile and told them, "Aunt Quinn is waiting for you with pancakes. Go have fun." He did not wait to see the car pull away before he grabbed Chloe's hand and sprinted toward the airport terminal. The twins had spent the entire ride in nervous silence, watching the familiar city streets turn into suburban roads, clutching their backpacks. They were entirely unaware that the destination they were heading toward was no longer a safe haven. The driver stopped in front of the familiar 2-story suburban house, helped them unload their massive suitcases onto the driveway, and drove off, fulfilling his strict point-to-point drop-off instructions. Leo, trying to be the brave older brother by exactly 3 minutes, dragged the heavy bags up the front steps. He reached up and pressed the doorbell, but the house had fundamentally changed. It was no longer the drafty, welcoming sanctuary they remembered. The property had been completely renovated and purchased by a man named Elias Vance. Elias was the chief executive officer of a highly successful cybersecurity firm. He was a man composed entirely of rigid principles, precise routines, and zero tolerance for unpredictability. The perimeter of the property was now monitored by a state-of-the-art artificial intelligence camera system. Within 2 seconds of Leo pressing the doorbell, facial recognition software scanned the children, flagged them as unknown entities, and sent a high-priority alert directly to Elias's tablet. Elias was sitting in his home office on the 2nd floor. He pulled up the live feed and frowned. He did not see immediate threats. He saw 2 freezing, trembling children standing on his front porch alongside luggage that was almost as tall as they were. Elias did not yell through the intercom system. He did not ignore them and hope they would walk away. He walked downstairs, disarmed the heavy smart locks, and slowly opened the front door. Leo and Mia shrank back, their eyes darting around in absolute confusion. This towering, stern-faced stranger was not their Aunt Quinn. Seeing their immediate terror and the biting cold wind whipping around them, Elias softened his posture. He gently ushered them out of the freezing weather and into the warm, secure foyer of his home. He left their heavy bags by the door, guided them to the expansive kitchen island, and quietly prepared 2 large mugs of hot chocolate while they warmed their freezing hands. He sat across from them and asked a few calm, direct questions. The twins, desperate for an adult to make sense of the situation, stammered out that their dad had put them in a car and told them their aunt lived here. They provided Mason's full name and my name. A normal person might have tried to look me up on social media or ask the kids for a phone number to resolve the mix-up privately. Elias Vance was not a normal person. He operated on the highest echelon of security protocols. In his analytical mind, two vulnerable minors had just been dumped at a random residential location by a hired driver, without a legal guardian in sight. That was not a family misunderstanding. That was a severe legal violation, without a single second of hesitation. Elias picked up his phone and dialed emergency services. He calmly and clinically reported the situation. "I have a case of intentional abandonment of minors at a private residence," he stated clearly to the dispatcher. He requested the immediate presence of both the local police department and Child Protective Services. Within 15 minutes, the quiet suburban street was flashing with the red and blue lights of 3 police patrol cars. Uniformed officers and a specialized social worker stepped into Elias's home to take over the situation. The children were safe, wrapped in thick blankets, sipping their drinks, but the massive machinery of the justice system had officially been set into motion. At that exact same moment, over 1,000 miles away, Mason and Chloe's first-class flight touched down in sunny Miami, completely oblivious to the absolute firestorm igniting back in Chicago. Mason pulled out his phone on the airport tarmac. He snapped a glamorous selfie of him and Chloe holding expensive champagne glasses, posting it to his social media with a smug caption that read, "Huge thanks to the best sister Quinn for babysitting the twins so we could have this VIP getaway." He tagged my old, deactivated account. He felt utterly invincible, believing his manipulation had worked perfectly. But the authorities in Chicago were already working with breathtaking speed, utilizing the license plate captured by Elias's high-definition security cameras. The police tracked down the rideshare driver in less than 30 minutes. The driver was summoned to the local precinct and was more than happy to cooperate to clear his own name. He immediately handed over his vehicle's dashboard camera footage. The high-definition audio and video provided absolute, ironclad proof. The footage clearly showed Mason aggressively shoving the children into the car, throwing their bags onto the leather seats, and snapping at the driver to just drop them at the pin and leave. It captured the driver specifically asking if an adult would be waiting outside to receive the minors, and it recorded Mason blatantly lying, stating that the homeowner was tracking the ride and would be standing right in the driveway. The evidence was pristine, undeniable, and utterly damning. The trap Mason had tried to set for me had just violently snapped shut on his own leg. I was 30 minutes into the most critical presentation of my fiscal year. The executive boardroom was silent, every eye fixed on the projected supply chain analytics. When my private emergency phone vibrated in my pocket, I had set a strict bypass filter on that device. Only 2 people could reach it, my private security firm and my attorney. I smoothly clicked the presentation remote to the next slide, offered a polite smile to the board of directors, and calmly excused myself. I stepped out into the heavily soundproofed hallway, the thick glass door sealing shut behind me, and answered the call. It was not my attorney. It was a lead detective from the Chicago Police Department. Using a conferenced line coordinated by my legal team, the detective's voice was gruff, filled with the exhausted tension of a man dealing with a potential child endangerment case. He asked me to verify my identity and my relationship to the 2 minors currently sitting in protective custody. He then asked if I had expected them at my residence. "No," I stated clearly, my voice carrying zero hesitation. "I do not live at that address. I have not lived there for 4 months. No, I did not agree to babysit. I explicitly denied the request and forbade their father from sending them anywhere near me." While I stood in that pristine, climate-controlled corridor dismantling his entire narrative with absolute precision, Mason was experiencing a very different kind of reality check. 1,000 miles south. The humid ocean breeze of Miami was wafting through the open doors of a 5-star oceanfront resort. Mason and Chloe had just strutted up to the concierge desk. They were completely relaxed, practically vibrating with the smug satisfaction of having successfully dumped their parental responsibilities. Mason slid his credit card across the polished marble counter to check into their luxury suite. He was probably already imagining his complimentary welcome cocktail. Instead, he got a heavy hand clamped firmly onto his shoulder. Two uniformed officers from the Miami-Dade Police Department had been waiting quietly in the lobby. There was no polite warning. There was no quiet aside. Right in front of the horrified hotel staff and dozens of wealthy vacationers, the officers informed Mason and Chloe that they were being detained on felony warrants for child endangerment and abandonment. The color instantly drained from Mason's face. The arrogant smirk vanished, replaced by sheer, unadulterated panic as the cold metal handcuffs clicked loudly around his wrists. Chloe began to scream hysterically, her designer sunglasses falling to the floor as they were both forcefully escorted out of the glamorous lobby and shoved into the back of a sweltering squad car. Down at the local Miami precinct, the suffocating reality of a concrete interrogation room finally set in, but Mason, true to his nature, immediately tried to manipulate his way out of the trap. He turned on the waterworks. He cried dramatic, heaving tears across the metal table, weaving a pathetic tale of a loving father who had simply been betrayed by an unstable family member. He desperately tried to paint me as the villain. He told the interrogating officers that I suffered from severe psychological issues and chronic memory loss. He swore up and down that I had enthusiastically promised to be waiting on the porch to welcome the twins, and that my absence was just another one of my erratic, crazy episodes. It was a decent performance. It might have even worked if he were dealing with a family member who was willing to enable him, but he was dealing with the unyielding machinery of the law, and I had come fully prepared. Simultaneously, up in Chicago, my personal attorney walked through the double doors of the precinct where the investigation was headquartered. He bypassed the patrol officers and walked straight into the lead detective's office, dropping a thick, flawlessly organized leather binder onto the desk. We called it the death file. It contained everything needed to mathematically obliterate Mason's pathetic defense. First, my attorney presented the official property transfer records, proving the house had been legally sold and handed over 120 days prior. Next, he provided the certified transcripts and screenshots of my morning text messages, where I clearly and unequivocally told Mason not to send his children, but the ultimate kill shot, the tiny, lethal detail that Mason never saw coming, was a simple, wrinkled postal slip. It was a receipt for a piece of certified mail sent exactly 90 days ago. When I moved to my secure downtown apartment, I knew my family would eventually try to hunt me down to demand money or favors. So, my lawyer had mailed a formal cease and desist notice outlining my new boundaries and strictly forbidding them from appearing at my new, undisclosed location. The receipt in the detective's hands bore Mason's exact, verified signature, confirming he had personally received and signed for that document. The detective stared at the signature, the pieces of the puzzle aggressively clicking into place. Mason's tears in Miami were not born of a tragic misunderstanding. The dark, calculated motive was completely exposed. Mason knew I did not live at that house. He intentionally abandoned his children at the residence of a total stranger, hoping the new homeowner would cause a massive, chaotic scene. He gambled that I would be dragged into the ensuing legal mess, or that the sheer guilt of my niece and nephew being traumatized would force me to open my checkbook. He was drowning in debt, and his ultimate plan was to manufacture a crisis so catastrophic that I would be forced to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in hush money just to make the scandal disappear, thereby rescuing his failing finances. He gambled his own children's safety to extort me, and thanks to a single postal receipt, the police now had the indisputable proof. The emergency custody hearing took place exactly 72 hours after the catastrophic arrests in Miami. The municipal courthouse was a massive, imposing structure of cold marble and echoing corridors, a place entirely devoid of warmth. I sat at the polished wooden table assigned to the respondent, my posture meticulously straight, my hands folded perfectly in front of me. Across the aisle, my parents were putting on a performance worthy of a national stage award. They had strutted through the heavy oak doors, dressed in their finest, most absurdly expensive country club attire. My mother wore a pristine pastel pink designer suit, her neck adorned with a heavy string of pearls. My father wore a tailored navy blazer over a crisp linen shirt, his gold watch catching the harsh fluorescent light. They deliberately dressed to project an aura of established, untouchable wealth. They wanted the court to see them as the noble, capable patriarch and matriarch stepping down from their pedestal to rescue their tragic family. As soon as the judge called the hearing to order to determine the emergency placement of Leo and Mia, the theatrical weeping began. My mother produced a monogrammed silk handkerchief, dabbing delicately at her completely dry eyes. She choked out fabricated sobs, begging the court to grant them full, unconditional guardianship of their precious, traumatized grandchildren. But the true motive surfaced almost immediately, through their aggressively overpriced attorney. They did not just ask for custody. They formally filed a petition demanding that I be ordered to pay extensive emotional damages for the distress I had allegedly caused the family. To top it off, they demanded the court force me to provide a massive, mandatory monthly child support stipend directly into their bank accounts to fund their new responsibilities. When it was his turn to address the bench, my father stood up, puffing out his chest with righteous, manufactured indignation. He pointed a shaking, manicured finger directly at my face. He looked at the presiding judge with an expression of pure, theatrical disgust. "Your Honor, my daughter is nothing but a heartless corporate machine," he boomed, his voice echoing loudly off the wood-paneled walls. "We gave her absolutely everything, and she has morphed into a spoiled, arrogant monster who completely rejects her own flesh and blood. She deliberately abandoned her innocent niece and nephew out of pure greed and spite. She has limitless resources to care for them, but she stubbornly refuses. She must be penalized for her blatant cruelty. She must be legally compelled to financially support us so we can repair the horrific, lasting damage she has inflicted upon this family." I did not flinch. I did not interrupt him. I sat there in total silence, watching him dig his own grave with a golden shovel. I let the heavy silence stretch out in the courtroom after he finally sat down, breathless from his own venomous monologue. The judge, an older woman with a stern face and zero tolerance for nonsense, turned her gaze toward my side of the room. My attorney, a man who operated with the terrifying, silent precision of a deep-water predator, stood up. He did not yell in protest. He did not wave his arms. He simply picked up a massive, heavily indexed binder of financial documents and walked calmly toward the judge's bench. "Your Honor," my attorney began, his voice perfectly smooth and lethal, "the petitioners have just spent the last 20 minutes claiming my client is a greedy, heartless machine who actively destroys her family. However, the documented empirical truth is the exact opposite. For the last 4 years, my client has been the sole, invisible pillar keeping her parents from complete and total financial annihilation." The courtroom instantly fell dead silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning vents. My parents exchanged a sharp, panicked glance, the arrogant sneers slowly melting off their faces. My attorney handed the first thick stack of certified records to the judge. "My client is not merely a successful corporate executive," my lawyer continued, pacing slowly back to his table. 3 years ago, operating through an anonymous corporate holding limited liability company, she purchased the primary commercial real estate building located in the downtown shopping district. Yes, Your Honor, I am referring to the exact same building that currently houses the petitioner's high-end fashion boutique, as well as their son Mason's so-called ghost consulting firm. The psychological impact in the room was instantaneous and violent. The artificial color completely evaporated from my mother's face. Her jaw dropped open in a silent gasp of absolute horror. My father gripped the edge of the defense table so hard his knuckles turned stark white. For years, they had ruthlessly bragged to their country club friends about their prime commercial location. They had looked down their noses at everyone, genuinely believing they were independent elites, never once realizing they were operating their entire pathetic empire on a piece of property that I owned outright. But the demolition was not finished. My lawyer was just warming up. "Furthermore, Your Honor," he stated, pulling a pristine, red-lined accounting ledger from his briefcase, The petitioners have not paid a single dime of their required commercial rent in exactly 8 months, not one penny. They are completely and utterly insolvent. My client has been quietly paying the property taxes out of her own pocket and absorbing their massive financial losses just to keep a roof over their failing, fraudulent business. She subsidized their luxurious lifestyle while they continually demanded more. Before my parents could even draw a breath to formulate a pathetic lie or object to the evidence, my lawyer delivered the ultimate, bone-crushing strike. Since the petitioners have just declared on the public legal record that my client is a heartless corporate machine who owes them nothing, my client has decided to finally grant their wish. My attorney turned sharply on his heel, walked directly over to my parents' table, and slammed a thick manila envelope right on top of their legal pads. Consider yourselves officially served. That is a commercial eviction order. You have exactly 30 days to clear out your inventory and vacate the premises. The aristocratic facade shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces right there in front of the court reporter and the gallery. My mother let out a genuine, shrill shriek of sheer panic, clutching her pearls as if they could somehow save her. My father leaped out of his chair, sputtering uncontrollably, shouting at the top of his lungs that it was a massive mistake, that I could not possibly do this to my own flesh and blood. The judge aggressively slammed her heavy wooden gavel down, the sharp crack silencing my father's hysterical outburst. Her face had twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. She spent the next 5 minutes silently flipping through the financial ledgers my lawyer had provided. It took a seasoned professional no time at all to spot the glaring irregularities, the manipulated tax filings, and the severe, desperate lack of actual liquid assets. My parents were not wealthy. Capable socialites, they were broke, desperate frauds surviving entirely on a toxic mixture of high-interest credit card debt and my silent, unappreciated charity. The judge looked down at them with unparalleled, icy contempt. You have the sheer audacity to walk into my courtroom, draped in expensive jewelry, and demand monetary damages from the very person who has been secretly keeping you out of federal bankruptcy court, the judge asked, her voice dripping with lethal scorn. Your petition for emergency guardianship is completely and entirely denied. You possess absolutely zero financial capacity to care for yourselves, let alone provide a stable environment for 2 traumatized children. Furthermore, based on these heavily doctored business ledgers presented today, I am officially forwarding a copy of this court transcript and these financial documents to the State Revenue Department for a full, comprehensive audit of your business practices. My parents collapsed back into their chairs, completely paralyzed, gasping for air like fish thrown violently onto dry land. They had confidently walked into that room fully expecting to conquer me, to publicly shame me, and to permanently drain my bank accounts. Instead, they were leaving completely bankrupt, facing an aggressive state tax audit, and losing the very last shred of the false prestige they had built their entire worthless identities upon. The parasitic umbilical cord had not just been cut, it had been incinerated. While my parents were hyperventilating over their impending bankruptcy in the civil courtroom, the legal bloodbath was rapidly shifting to its next target. Down the hall in the criminal division, the horrifying reality of a lengthy federal prison sentence was finally breaking through Chloe's designer delusions. She had married my brother solely for access to what she firmly believed was a bottomless family vault. Now that she had watched the commercial building get completely seized and realized my parents were utterly broke, her selfish survival instincts kicked into high gear. She did not shed a single tear for the man she had sworn to love. She did not hesitate for a single second. Behind closed doors, while Mason was still crying to his overworked public defender, Chloe struck a brutal, highly calculated plea deal in exchange for total criminal immunity regarding the child abandonment charges. She handed the district attorney a silver, heavily encrypted hard drive. It contained gigabytes of meticulously organized digital receipts, proving that Mason had been running a massive, illegal cryptocurrency laundering scheme right out of that very same ghost consulting firm I had just forcefully evicted. When Mason was hauled back into the courtroom for his official arraignment and bail hearing, The prosecutor casually dropped the new, devastating indictments onto the public record. Mason stood frozen in his orange jumpsuit, realizing in real time that his own wife had ruthlessly sold him out just to save herself. His mind simply snapped under the immense pressure. The fragile, carefully constructed veneer of the misunderstood, loving father completely evaporated. He violently lunged against his heavy iron chains, his face turning an alarming shade of purple as he screamed across the center aisle. He called me a heartless monster. He shrieked that I was a cold-blooded Terminator designed specifically to destroy my own family, cursing my name until his voice cracked and echoed off the high ceilings. The presiding judge, a towering man with absolutely zero patience for theatrical rage, violently slammed his heavy wooden gavel against the sounding block. He signaled for 3 burly bailiffs to aggressively wrestle Mason back into his wooden chair. The judge did not just admonish my brother, he systematically dismantled Mason's entire future. Looking down with eyes as hard as flint, the judge set his bail at an astronomical $5 million in cash. He then immediately upgraded Mason's charges from simple child abandonment to federal wire fraud, money laundering, and the intentional, malicious use of minors as instruments for financial extortion. Mason was immediately dragged away to a maximum security holding block, sobbing uncontrollably. Through all of this terrifying screaming, the vicious internal betrayals, and the complete, catastrophic collapse of my blood relatives, there was one singular, beautiful thought that kept my heart steady and my mind clear. Leo and Mia were nowhere near this toxic wasteland. I had used my resources to make absolutely sure of that, while their father was being locked in a concrete cage and their grandparents were losing their minds over unpaid taxes. The twins were sitting safely in a bright, sunlit room at a specialized pediatric trauma center. They were eating warm chocolate chip cookies, drawing pictures, and playing with a gentle golden retriever therapy dog. They were completely and totally shielded from the radioactive fallout of their family's disastrous, greedy choices. When the family court judge reconvened later that afternoon to determine the permanent placement of the children, I finally stepped up to the wooden witness stand. The judge looked down at me with a mixture of quiet respect and intense curiosity, fully expecting me to confidently petition for full custody now that my parents were officially legally disqualified. But I knew exactly who I was, and more importantly, I knew exactly what those children actually needed to heal. I took a deep, centering breath and looked directly at the bench. "Your Honor," I stated clearly, my voice ringing out in the quiet room. "I love my niece and nephew deeply, but my career requires me to be on airplanes across the globe for over 200 days a year. I live in a sterile, high-rise apartment designed for a single corporate executive. Those children have already suffered enough neglect. They do not need another distant, distracted adult paying for expensive nannies to raise them. They need a real home with grass and stability. Therefore, I formally petition the court to grant full legal and physical custody to their great-aunt, Clara." Aunt Clara was the ultimate family outcast. She was a warm, fiercely independent woman who had been completely shunned by my arrogant parents decades ago because she preferred wearing worn flannel shirts and running a sprawling, messy dairy farm in rural Wisconsin instead of attending high-society charity galas. She was the only person in our entire bloodline who actually knew how to unconditionally love another human being without asking for anything in return. To ensure the state had absolutely no hesitations about Clara's financial capability to raise 2 growing children, my lawyer stepped forward and handed the judge one final, flawless document. It was a legally binding, irrevocable trust fund that I had established that very morning. I had heavily capitalized it with $3 million of my own personal wealth. The trust was specifically designed to unconditionally cover every single expense Leo and Mia would ever have, ranging from their daily groceries and premium health care to their future university tuitions and first homes. But it came with one absolute, impenetrable fail-safe. The legal charter explicitly stated that my parents, Mason and Chloe, were permanently and legally barred from accessing, managing, or even requesting a single red cent from the fund Under penalty of immediate federal prosecution, the wealth was entirely locked away for the innocent, forever untouchable by the parasites. From his cold holding cell, Mason spent his days obsessively plotting his ultimate revenge against me. He managed to convince a desperate, sleazy defense attorney to dig deep into our late grandfather's estate records. They found a microscopic, archaic loophole in a 20-year-old will, a vague clause they firmly believed could override Aunt Clara's guardianship. Their goal was to force the probate court to transfer the children's physical custody, and more importantly, the entire financial control of the $3 million trust fund, straight back to my bankrupt parents. They officially filed an emergency motion, genuinely thinking they had finally outmaneuvered me and hijacked the wealth. But I had seen this exact maneuver coming for years. I immediately contacted the presiding judge and submitted a digital audio recording I had quietly kept secured in a bank safety deposit box for nearly a decade. It was a crystal-clear recording of Mason drunkenly bragging at a holiday party about how he had meticulously forged our grandfather's signature to siphon off the original estate funds before the old man even passed away. The moment that audio was played in the judge's chambers, the legal loophole instantly evaporated. Mason's own attorney was so terrified of being implicated in a massive fraud cover-up that he formally withdrew his representation that exact same afternoon. Mason was left entirely defenseless, facing a guaranteed, lengthy federal prison sentence with absolutely zero possibility of parole. My parents, meanwhile, were brutally introduced to the reality of the working class they had spent their entire lives mocking. After being evicted from the commercial building, they were quickly forced out of their luxury rental home because their credit was completely destroyed. Their prestigious country club memberships were publicly revoked due to months of unpaid dues. The last I heard through the legal grapevine, my father was working 25 hours a week tearing tickets at a local movie theater, and my mother was folding discounted sweaters at a retail outlet store just to keep the electricity turned on in their tiny, cramped, one-bedroom apartment. They were permanently severed from my life, and most importantly, from the lives of their grandchildren. Exactly 6 months after the final court decree, I drove my car up a long, winding gravel driveway in rural Wisconsin. The crisp autumn air smelled heavily of pine needles and damp earth, a stark contrast to the concrete of the city. As I pulled up to Aunt Clara's sprawling farmhouse, I saw a sight that finally let the very last knot of tension leave my chest. Leo and Mia were laughing uncontrollably in the distance. They were wearing faded denim overalls, feeding fresh carrots to a gentle brown horse, and carrying large woven baskets filled with freshly picked red apples. When they heard my car engine, they dropped their baskets and sprinted across the massive green lawn. They collided with me, wrapping their arms around my waist in a tight, desperate embrace. It was the first time in my entire life I had received a hug from a family member that was completely pure, entirely devoid of manipulation, guilt, or hidden financial agendas. Later that evening, as the sun began to set behind the rolling hills and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Leo sat next to me on the wooden porch swing. He looked down at his sneakers, his young face scrunched in deep thought, and asked a question that momentarily stopped my heart. "Aunt Quinn, do you hate my dad?" I wrapped my arm around his small shoulders and pulled him close against my side. "No, Leo, I do not hate him," I replied gently, making sure he heard the absolute truth in my voice. "I just stopped allowing other people to hurt me, and I promise you, I will always be right here to make absolutely sure that no one ever hurts you or your sister again." Late that night, I returned to my sanctuary on the 50th floor of my high-security apartment building. I stood by the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the endless glittering grid of downtown Chicago. I realized then that the most perfect, devastating revenge is never found in screaming matches, throwing people into the mud, or destroying your own peace to prove a point. True revenge is simply taking a sharp pair of scissors, cutting the heavy ropes they used to drag you down, and flying upwards. You leave them behind to drown in the very mud they created themselves. For the first time in 35 years, The lock on my life had been completely changed, and I was the only person holding the key. Thank you so much, dear listeners, for tuning into this journey. Where in the world are you listening from today? I would love to know in the comments. If you found today's story empowering and want to hear more, please help us keep the channel alive by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon. There, you can listen to our absolute best, exclusive true stories that are simply too intense and detailed to publish on YouTube. You can easily join by scanning the QR code right on your screen, or by using the Patreon link located in the video description or the pinned comment below. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next story.